along the Moose River to investigate trappers who had gone missing. The mission was routine until strange tracks began appearing in the snow, and voices called from the trees in familiar tones no one could explain. Something watched them from just beyond the lantern light. By the time they realized what was following them, it was already choosing who it would take first. So, before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks! I first saw the orders in the yellow lantern light over the mess table at our winter post near Lake Abitibi. Frost edged the tent canvas, and our breath hung in the air while the captain read. We were a small group away from the rest of the regiment for the season, and the cold had already worn us down. "Patrol north," he said. "Follow the Moose River. Check the trapper cabins. Men are missing. You have 14 days of rations. Make them last." 8 of us stepped forward. Sergeant Hoare was first, tall and heavy through the shoulders, beard full of ice, eyes that stayed calm even when the canvas snapped in the wind. Corporal Hayes came beside him, thinner, sharp in the face, always moving his thumb along the edge of his rifle stock. Dumont, our scout, stood a little apart, short and compact, with dark hair tied back and a long rifle across his shoulder. He had grown up along these rivers and spoke only when there was something worth saying. Lavoy and McKenna volunteered together. Lavoy was narrow in the chest and always ready with a comment, some attempt at humor that did not always land. McKenna from Halifax had a straight back and a quiet way of agreeing or disagreeing with only a look. Miller came last, youngest by several years, blonde hair showing under his cap, hands without old scars. I gave my own name because I wanted movement more than I wanted another week sitting in the same tent. We left at first light. The snow had hardened overnight, and our snowshoes crunched across it in a steady rhythm. 2 horses pulled a low sled loaded with hardtack, salt pork, spare blankets, and a small keg of kerosene. Our rifles lay across our backs or under our arms. Wool trousers, heavy coats, and scarves covered everything else. The cold still reached the skin beneath, but that no longer surprised any of us. Dumont walked ahead, breaking trail. When the wind shifted his scarf, I saw a small bundle of carved pieces hanging around his neck. Bone and would worn smooth by time. "Those charms from a priest?" I asked when we paused on a ridge. He shook his head. "For my people," he said. "For the woods." Sergeant Hoare heard, but did not comment. The army did not issue such things, but no one thought of taking them. We all had something. Hayes kept a folded scrap of paper in his breast pocket and read the same line on it each night. Lavoy tapped the second button of his coat 3 times before he lay down to sleep. Miller cleaned his rifle every evening, whether we had fired or not. The first 2 days passed in a pattern that settled into our bodies. Walk until our lungs burned. Rest long enough for the horses to catch their breath. Move again. Trees rose close on both sides of the narrow track. Spruce and pine pressed together, branches heavy with snow. The sky stayed low and flat and never truly brightened. Once I saw a thin column of smoke between the trunks, but by the time I pointed it out, it had already faded. At night, we dug shallow hollows in the snow, pitched 2 canvas tents, and built low fires that we coaxed from damp wood. The smoke clung to our clothes and hair. After a meal of meat and hard bread, talk always drifted toward the stories the lumbermen told in the camps. Men say they hear something moving just beyond the light, Lavoy said on the 3rd night, staring past the ring of fire. Not a bear, not a wolf. Something that follows, waiting for someone to step away alone. Men say many things when the bottle is empty. Hoare answered, "The only thing that follows is the cold." Dumont watched the sparks rise. When the others grew quiet, he spoke without looking up. "There are older stories here," he said, "from before the logging roads. My grandfather told me that during hard winters, when people are starving, something dangerous moves through these woods. It knows men who are weak or greedy. It can draw them away from their people, make them turn on each other." Miller shifted closer to the fire. "You mean a spirit?" he asked. "Not a ghost," Dumont said. "Something that remembers when men first came here. It does not pass on. It only waits." The wind moved across the clearing, and the trees gave a low creak. I told myself it was only another tale meant to keep children close to the hearth. But when it came time for my watch, I checked the dark between the trunks more often than I needed. Each time I turned, the fire behind me felt smaller. On the fourth day, the air turned sharper. The moisture seemed to leave it, and it cut through our scarves. Our path left the old logging trail and followed the frozen curve of the Moose River. Ice covered it from bank to bank. Snow lay thin over the surface, blown into ripples by past winds. We walked along the eastern bank in single file, keeping the sled near the trees where the snow lay deeper. Near midday, Dumont raised a hand. We stopped and watched him move down onto the river ice. A line of tracks crossed from the far bank toward our side. They stepped in an even pattern, one after another, and vanished into the trees behind us. He brushed snow from one of the prints with his glove. The mark underneath was long and narrow, deeper at the front than at the heel, with a clear split where toes should have been. Hayes knelt and set his hand inside the print. "It's larger than mine," he said, "and I do not have small feet." "Moose?" McKenna asked, "Maybe with a bad hoof." "No hooves," Dumont said. "No claws either." "Then what left them?" Miller said. His voice sounded too loud on the open river. Dumont's gaze moved from the tracks to the forest on our side, then to the empty ridge beyond the far bank. The skin around his eyes had grown tight. He gave no answer. "We move on," Horse said. "Whatever made them is gone. Keep your rifles in hand." We stepped around the tracks and climbed back toward the tree line. I felt a strange reluctance to put my boots near those marks, as if they belonged to something that might object. The forest ahead looked no different than before, but every sound drew my attention. When a branch broke under the weight of snow farther in, my grip tightened on the stock of my rifle. By evening, we reached the first trapper's cabin marked on our map. It stood a short distance from the river, a low building of rough logs with a pitched roof under a heavy load of snow. No smoke rose from the chimney. No fresh tracks marked the small clearing around it. Only a few old snowshoe prints crossed the ground, softened and half filled by later drifts. Hoare lifted a hand, and we spread out without needing orders. Hayes and I moved along the right side of the clearing, rifles raised. McKenna and Miller took the left. Dumont stayed near the trees, watching the dark between the trunks rather than the cabin itself. The door hung slightly open. When I came closer, I saw that the wood around the latch had splintered inward. The iron catch lay bent on the ground. The hair on my arms rose under my sleeves. "Door's broken," I called. The sergeant joined me. He nudged the door with the barrel of his rifle. It swung inward on dry hinges and released a rush of colder air from the room beyond. "Hayes with me," Horse said. "The rest of you hold the line outside. If anyone or anything moves in those trees, you call out." I stepped across the threshold and into the dim interior of the cabin. Hayes and I moved through a narrow entry into the single room. The shutters were closed, and the small window near the table had frost around the edges. A cold iron stove stood in the corner with the door ajar and ash scattered across the floor. A cot near the back wall was overturned. A blanket lay half buried in the trampled dirt. A tin plate had cracked down the center and lay beside a spoon bent at the neck. On the far wall, deep marks cut into the log faces in a cluster near the door frame and higher up near the rafters. The cuts were clean and long. I held the lantern while Hayes checked the corners. A trapper's ledger lay open on the table with a pencil across it. The last page had a few lines in an unsteady hand. "Read it," Horse said from the doorway. Hayes spoke without raising his voice. "January 18th, heavy snow. River ice holds. Heard knocking on the wall near the stove. No one there. January 20th, meat cache broken. Something took strips and left the rope cut, not chewed. January 22nd, track outside looks like a foot, not a boot, long toes. January 24th, woke to tapping along the roof, heard my own name. We looked up at the same time. The ceiling boards had a row of fresh splits where something heavy had pressed down. I felt a brief pressure in my chest and tried to slow my breath. The air in the cabin carried a stale sourness, as if the room had been closed for weeks. Dumont stepped inside, eyes on the higher claw marks. He checked the spacing with his hand. "Too far apart for a man," he said. "Claw marks would be wider for a bear. Could it be a tool?" McKenna asked from the doorway. "No," Dumont said. "These were not made by iron." "Any bodies?" Hoare asked. No, I said. No blood either. We searched the small lean-to at the back. A broken crate lay open with strips of dried fish scattered across the snow. A length of rope had been cut with one clean stroke. No knife lay near it. Hor gave orders to secure the cabin for the night. The trees pressed close on 3 sides, and the river lay down a short slope on the 4th. We drew the sled near the wall and posted watches in pairs. Miller and I had first watch. We stood by the corner, facing the river, rifles at ready, lantern turned low. I kept the cabin wall on my back. The sky darkened and the cold settled deeper. The snow surface hardened until each step from the horses made a sharp scrape. Our breath rose and drifted away. For a time, there was only the sound of the stove inside and the creak of timber. After an hour, Miller touched my sleeve and pointed toward the river. Something stood near the center of the ice where the tracks had crossed earlier. It did not move. It had the height of a tall man or taller and an outline that did not match any animal I knew. The head seemed narrow, the shoulders drawn forward, the arms long. I lifted my rifle and felt the grain of the stock. The sight picture shook. I held my breath and steadied it on the corner of the cabin. "Do not shoot yet," I said. We watched. The shape did not sway. It did not breathe steam. It stood as if fixed. I blinked and saw nothing change. "Maybe it is a stump frozen in place," Miller whispered. "No stump grows from the center of a river," I said. A few minutes later, a hard gust moved down the valley. Powder blew across the ice. When the drift cleared, the shape was gone. No crunch of steps had reached us. No splash. The river remained smooth and unbroken. We did not call out because I did not know what we would say. The next pair took our place, and we went inside. My hand shook while I unstrapped my snowshoes. I kept the lantern near and checked the wick without thinking. I slept for a short while and woke to Hayes speaking with the sergeant in a low voice. "Something circled us," Hayes said. "I found prints behind the cabin under the eaves. They stepped close together, no heel." "Did you follow them?" Hor asked. "No," Hayes said. "They stopped at the deadfall and vanished." We ate a thin meal at dawn. No one spoke more than needed. Dumont marked the cabin door with a small carving and a line of ash. He bowed his head for a moment, not in prayer, but as if measuring distance. We moved upstream again. The woods grew tighter, and the path climbed over a series of ridges. The horses grew skittish and snorted at shadows. Lavoy gave them gentle curses and clucked his tongue. The sled stuck twice, and we had to haul it clear by hand. Our pace dropped. The dark reached us while we were still an hour away. "We camp here," Hor said. "No fire, no smoke. We eat cold." We set the tents in a hollow under the lee of a rock face. The lantern stayed dark. We passed biscuit and cold pork by hand. Everyone chewed in silence. The cold put a dull pressure behind my eyes. I thought of my bunk at the post and pushed the thought away. Around midday, we reached a narrow gorge where the river squeezed between stone. A light wind carried a smell like old musk and damp hair. We found the second cabin after the sun dropped. It sat at the edge of a small clearing with a pole rack for drying meat and a small smokehouse beside it. The door stood closed and latched. Smoke rose from the pipe, but thinned as we watched as if the fire inside had just gone down. "Someone is home," McKinnis said. Hor raised a hand, and we spread again. He knocked on the door with the back of his glove. No answer came. He knocked again and named our unit. Still no answer. He lifted the latch and pushed inward. The warm air hit my face and carried the smell of spruce pitch and burnt fat. A man sat on a stool near the stove. His head rested back against the wall. His eyes were open and dull. A rifle lay across his knees. A length of rawhide dangled from one hand. His cheeks were sunken and his lips cracked. Hor stepped forward and touched the back of his wrist. "Cold," he said. "He died within the day." We searched the room. The shelves were almost bare. A bag of flour lay open and half spilled. A line of hooks on the wall held nothing. The smokehouse out back stood open to the air. Door torn from one hinge. The drying rack had broken slats and a dark stain below. The snow in the clearing held a circle of trampled marks. Among them were 2 sets of fresher tracks that did not match ours. They stepped long with narrow ends and deep toes. Inside the cabin, on a strip of birch bark near the dead man's elbow, Someone had scratched a few words with the tip of a knife. Hayes read them aloud. "It calls at night," he said. "I hear my wife who is not here. It asks for meat. It never stops. If I go outside, I will not come back." I looked at the dead man's hands. The nails had broken to the quick, as if he had clawed at something. His boots were gone. The soles of his feet showed cracks and hard callus. He had tied rawhide around his ankles as if to brace them. "We bury him," McKenna said. "We cannot dig," Horse said. "The ground is iron. We will stack stones." We gathered rocks from the edge of the clearing and set them over a shallow mound of snow. Dumont placed a small wooden figure at the top. It had a simple face with a straight mouth and 2 holes for eyes. He spoke a few words in his own language, voice even. While we worked, Miller stood near the tree line and watched the path we had taken in. When I carried the last stone to the mound, he called my name. I went to him and followed his gaze. On the far side of the clearing, hidden behind a split trunk, something pale moved a fraction to one side. It was only a shoulder and part a long arm, but the skin looked stretched and dry. The hand gripped the bark without tremor. The nails shone dull and thick. I raised my rifle. The tree hid the body. I took 2 steps left to change the angle. The shoulder slid back behind the trunk with a calm motion that did not match an animal. I did not fire. The line of sight was poor, and I had no order. We fell back toward the cabin in pairs. Horse set posts around the door and window and placed the sled along the wall to block the lower gap. We cut a small loophole under the eaves with an axe and set a lantern behind it. "Two awake at all times," he said. "Do not leave the light." During my watch with Lavoie, the wind rose and the trees gave off small cracks as frost tightened in the wood. The lantern flame drew a narrow cone on the snow. Beyond that distance, the night swallowed everything. The horses stamped and tossed their heads. Then the sound came, thin and clear from the edge of the clearing. It was the dead trapper's voice. I had heard it earlier when Hayes read the bark. The same flat vowels, the same dry air. "Help me," it said. I fell. I broke my leg. Lavoie's jaw worked. He had not known the man. The sound called again, closer. A shuffle moved across the crust. I thought of the note. I thought of the cut rope. Hor answered from inside without opening the door. "Go away," he said. "We know what you are." The voice stopped. A low scraping started on the outer wall near the window. It moved slow from one side of the logs to the other. The nails made a long line of shallow cuts in the wood. McKenna lifted his rifle and steadied it on the loophole. He did not fire. The scraping ended. Silence settled and stretched as our breath drew and fell. Near dawn, I heard footsteps on the roof. They were light and placed one after the other in a careful cross. A weight settled above the stovepipe and the draw faltered. Smoke lowered inside the cabin. Hayes pulled the kettle off the top before the soot fell into it. A moment later, the weight moved away and the draft cleared. We waited and listened. The steps went toward the door and stopped. When we opened the latch at first light, a long set of prints stood in a row from the edge of the clearing to the threshold. The last marks ended at the sill. The first on the other side began 6 feet away on the snow. I bent to examine them. The toes had cut deep. The path led into the trees and melted into shadow. We did not speak about the call again. We packed quickly and moved upstream. The cold felt closer to the skin than before. I watched the line just inside the trees where our track ran. I saw a pale shape there twice traveling with us and then dropping back. When I turned my head to fix it, it was gone. The others saw it too because rifles lifted and lowered at odd moments and hands went to straps and buckles and checked them again. In the afternoon, the wind carried the smell of fresh blood. We followed it to a small glade where a deer lay downed and open. The ribs had been pried apart. The organs were gone. There were no tracks around the carcass except one set that led in and led out. They pressed deep and did not wander. Miller swallowed hard. He had not yet seen a scene like that in winter without wolf sign. He looked to me, and I had no comfort to offer. We left the glade without taking any meat. It felt wrong to cut from something that might draw us back at night. As the light thinned, we reached a narrow valley with tall cliffs on both sides. The river ran straight and fast under the ice. Dumont said the third cabin lay 2 miles ahead at the mouth of a tributary. We pushed on. The horses balked, and through their heads. The sled's left runner hit a buried stone and snapped. We had to lift the load onto the right side and drag it unevenly through powder. Our pace dropped. The dark reached us while we were still an hour away. "We camp here," Horse said. "No fire, no smoke. We eat cold." We set the tents in a hollow under the lee of a rock face. The lantern stayed dark. We passed biscuit and cold pork by hand. Everyone chewed in silence. The cold put a dull pressure behind my eyes. I thought of my bunk at the post and pushed the thought away. At midnight, during a change of watch, something moved in the snow beyond the hollow. It slid rather than walked, as if long limbs pulled it over the surface. It stopped near the sled. The horses trembled and tried to pull free. We lay still and held our breath. A long arm reached under the tarp and drew out a sack. The sack tore. The meat inside slid onto the snow. The shape crouched and began to eat. The sound was wet and steady. It did not pause to listen. "Hold," Hor whispered. Miller shifted, and a buckle on his strap touched metal. The sound was small, but clear in that stillness. The feeding stopped. The head turned toward us. I could not see the features, only the outline of jaws that opened too wide. I counted my breaths and kept them slow. The shape rose to its full height and stood still. Then it moved away without hurry. It went up the slope with long steps and disappeared over the ridge. When it was gone, I realized my hands had gone numb on the stock of my rifle. I rubbed them together and waited for pain. Hayes covered the tear in the sled tarp with a blanket. No one slept after that. We waited for the thin light and left the hollow as soon as the horses could move. The third cabin sat near the meeting point of the two rivers. The tributary cut a narrow channel through stone and joined the Moose River at a wide bend. The cabin stood on a rise, overlooking the water with a small shed beside it. Smoke did not rise from the pipe. The front door was closed, but snow had been pushed aside along the threshold sometime within the past day. The prints there were human boot prints, not the long, narrow ones. They led around the side and vanished in a brush. We approached in silence. The horses refused to step closer, so we tied them to a small stand of birch 30 paces back. Dumont crouched near the cabin wall and placed 2 fingers against the wood. He closed his eyes and stayed still for a brief moment. "There is someone inside," he said. "Alive." Hort tapped twice on the door with his rifle, but "Canadian Forces Detachment," he said. "We are entering." No answer. He pushed the latch. Inside, a man crouched in the corner with a knife clutched tight in his fist. His beard was thick and gray. His coat sleeves were torn. He had a wound along his forearm where the skin had been stripped in a long, shallow path. His teeth chattered, though the stove glowed red. When he saw us, he raised the knife higher, not in threat, but in fear. "Keep back," he said. "It is here at night. It watches through the cracks." Hayes took slow steps and lowered his rifle to hip level. "We will not harm you," he said. The man's shoulders dropped. He lowered the knife point, but did not put it down. His voice shook. It came when the last trapper passed here. He said something followed him 3 nights. He said he heard his brother speak to him from outside. I told him to stay until morning. He left anyway. I never saw him again. He pointed toward the tributary with a knife. I followed his prints for half a mile. They ended near an outcrop. The long prints overlapped them. I returned here before nightfall. Hor checked the windows and door and secured them. "You're coming south with us," he said. "We will escort you back to the post." "No," the man said. "It will follow you. It does not stop. It knows hunger that does not fade." "We have rifles," McKenna said. "It does not fear a rifle," the man said. "You must burn it." We did not reply. None of us had heard anything that implied fire could destroy this creature. But the man's certainty made my stomach tighten. He spoke again before we could ask more. "It grows stronger the longer it follows. It learns your names. It remembers your voices. It makes you think someone you know is outside calling for you. You cannot answer it." The stove crackled. The room held a stale dampness. The man's eyes flicked to every shadow before returning to our faces. He looked ready to bolt at the smallest sound. We gave him food and water. His hands shook while he ate. When his stomach settled, he told us he had been here alone for 17 days. He broke the chimney stones himself so less smoke would escape. He had not slept longer than minutes at a time. He said the creature had stood outside his window last night until dawn. We debated staying here or pushing further east. Dumont argued to keep moving. It knows this cabin, he said. If it returns to a place it expects someone, it will look here first. We should not be inside waiting. I agreed. Remaining inside a familiar structure felt worse than open snow. The trapper insisted on coming south, so we made space for him and shared our blankets. We moved away from the tributary and back toward the main river, staying in the trees where the brush could break the wind. The horses struggled, and their breath formed heavy plumes that drifted around them in slow clouds. Before noon, we reached a wide clearing with tall, dead trees standing in scattered rows. Their bark had peeled away in strips and exposed a pale inner surface. Snow lay smooth between them. Dumont stopped and pointed with his chin. "Something has been here often," he said. I scanned the clearing and saw marks pressed deep into the snow where heavy weight had passed. The long prints gave a winding path from tree to tree. Many visits, many crossings. They spiraled toward the center of the clearing where a shallow depression lay empty. "We go around," Horse said. We left the clearing in a wide arc. The trapper walked close to McKenna and breathed fast through his mouth. We reached a narrow cut in the ground formed by some past spring flood and followed it west. Half an hour passed before the sound reached us, a single high cry from behind, like a person calling out from far away. The voice had the same tone and weight as Miller. Miller froze and looked back over his shoulder with sudden hope. "That was my brother," he said. "His brother was not out here. His brother was not even alive." "Keep moving," Horse said. His voice held no hesitation. Miller's face twisted. "It sounded like him," he said. He knew the logic. He knew the impossibility. Yet something in him had already responded before his mind rejected it. I stepped beside him and touched his elbow to guide him. "It knows that voice," Dumont said. "Do not think about it." We kept moving until the trees thickened again. The brush scraped against our coats and slowed our pace. The trapper breathed through clenched teeth. His wound seeped again and left small flecks of red where snow brushed it. By late afternoon, tension had driven every conversation to silence. Hayes finally spoke to break it. "This thing is choosing when to be seen," he said. "It knows we saw it. It wants us too tired to make a good choice. It wants us to separate," Dumont said. We reached a small shelf above a frozen pool at the river's edge. We made camp there because the slope behind us formed a barrier and narrowed the approach. We could see anything that would come from below. Hoare chose the watch order. I had second watch with Miller. When my watch came, the night mute cold pressed through every seam. Miller stood 10 paces away near the jut of rock. He watched the river ice below. It sounded exactly like him, he said quietly. "Not close, not clear, but like him." "He's not here," I said. "You know that." "I know," Miller said, "but it is not trying to fool us with random noise. It knows voices. It knows something." We stayed like that for a long time. My eyes strained to the tree line. Nothing moved. My breath slowed. The second half of our watch passed without another sound. I thought we might have a quiet night. The trapper screamed first. His voice tore out of the tent canvas with raw panic. Then the canvas ripped. Hoare burst from the tent with his rifle and lantern. Shadows moved fast near the ground. The trapper was gone from the tent. The prints led down the slope toward the river in a dragging line. We ran after them. I was first down the trail and nearly fell twice. The prints led to the pool at the river bend. A pale arm rose from the ice fog. Long fingers dragged the man under into the darkness below. His knife clattered on the ice and slid toward me. Hayes reached the spot and raised his rifle, but nothing remained to aim at. The cold air churned and stilled. The pool froze smooth again as if nothing had broken through. The trapper was gone. We stood around that frozen pool, and none of us spoke for several seconds. The cold air cracked in my lungs, and it felt like my heart beat against something heavy inside my chest. There was no blood. There was no trace other than the prints leading down and the way the ice still looked thinner at the exact spot he went under. We had all seen an arm take him. We could not pretend we imagined it. The trapper was alive seconds before, and now he was gone under solid ice. Hoare lowered his lantern and spoke in a steady voice that I knew cost him something to hold. "We do not chase it under. We go back to camp. Nobody breaks off alone. Not for any reason. We climbed the slope again. Hayes looked pale in the lantern light. He carried the trapper's dropped knife in his hand and kept staring at it like he wanted to make sense of something that had none. Miller kept wiping his glove on his coat, even though nothing had touched him. When we reached the tents, McKenna stared at us with his rifle raised already. He saw there were only 7 of us and closed his eyes for a second. We did not sleep again. We moved at first light toward the south with no food stop. Everyone kept scanning to the left and right between the tree trunks. The silence of the forest felt heavier. The snow seemed brighter and more reflective. Each footstep felt loud and careless and wrong. The river bent toward the west, and we followed it because the straightest path back to the post would cut open ground too exposed. None of us wanted open ground. Hayes walked beside me after an hour. "Do you think it knows which one of us is weakest?" he asked without looking at me. "It took the injured man. He was barely able to hold a knife," I said. "That is still weakness," Hayes said. "Which of us looks weak now?" I did not answer. I did not want to think about who looked weakest or what that would even mean to a creature like that. By midday, we saw something ahead near the riverbank. A small cluster of spruce leaned in one direction, roots twisted out of the ground. Beneath them lay the bones of a moose. The skull had been split clean along the top. The rib cage was pried out wide, and most of the spine was exposed. There were no marks of chewing or tearing. The bones were cracked and opened with deliberate force. Dumont stared at the scene quietly and then pointed at the ground with the head of his rifle. No wolves, no other animals, only those long prints. They circled the kill in wide arcs, almost like the creature had studied it before taking it apart. Horse set a faster pace after that. He did not speak this time. He just moved faster. The rest of us matched it without complaint. The horses pulled with small, terrified snorts now. They wanted out. They wanted distance more than any of us did. Near dusk, we heard would crack somewhere far behind us. Not sharp like a rifle, heavier, almost like a tree trunk broke under sudden weight. Hayes flinched. He turned his head and pressed his lips together. I kept walking and only breath slower. The sun went down behind a distant ridge, and we found another hollow against a low stone wall where wind could not hit us directly. We made camp with no fire again. The darkness settled even deeper around us. The stars were faint, and the sky had a gray haze that stole detail. We had a small amount of jerky and hardtack and ate in silence. For a moment, nobody spoke or moved except to adjust their blankets. Then McKenna whispered to Hoare. It followed. I saw something up near the deadfall 10 minutes ago. Pale and tall. Hoare nodded once. We hold position. No calling out, no wandering off. The first watch started with Hayes and Lavoie. The rest of us tried to close our eyes and rest, but none of us fell asleep. I kept staring at the crease in the tent ceiling above me and listening for any step or drag of snow. After about 2 hours, I heard Hayes whisper from outside. "Did you hear that?" We all sat up. Something moved outside the tent line. Slow steps one at a time. Not an animal's pattern. No breath sound, just steps. Then a voice. It spoke from the edge of the hollow in a normal human tone. "Sergeant, open the flap. I need to speak with you." It was the trapper's voice again. McKenna's hand shook on his rifle. Hoare did not move. "You are dead," Hoare said. "We watched you die." Silence. Then another voice. My voice, my exact voice. "Open the flap," it said. Same tone, same pace, same cadence. I felt a deep cold that had nothing to do with winter. Every part of my body rejected the sound of myself speaking from outside a tent. Dumont spoke low. "Do not respond again." The voice outside shifted to Hayes next, then McKenna, then Miller. It used each of our voices in sequence, each time exact. Then it said nothing at all. The steps moved away, slow at first, then faster, then gone. We did not move until first light. When morning came, we packed and started walking without debate. The wind had shifted south and carried sharper cold. The forest thinned slightly. I saw the faint shape of distant hills. That meant we were less than 3 days from the post, if we kept a straight pace. Nobody said the words out loud, but everyone had a slight rise in energy. We now had a direction and a target and the possibility of reaching solid walls and other men with rifles. 2 hours into that march, Miller stopped suddenly. His breath caught, and he raised his rifle. We turned. Between the trees at the precise distance where branches still hid detail but left clear outline, it stood. It was taller than any man. The skin looked stretched tight across bone. The arms hung almost to the knees. The hands ended in long, curved claws. The head was narrow. The jaw had no softness. The eyes were deep and hollow. It did not move. It did not blink. We all froze. The creature tilted its head a fraction as if considering us. Then, without a sound, it stepped backward and vanished into the trees. None of us spoke. We kept walking faster now. The silence was heavier than conversation. We needed to reach the post. We needed to get out of these woods before any one moment of fear broke someone's mind enough to separate. We all knew the creature wanted that. This was not random stalking anymore. It was choosing its timing. We marched until our legs shook. We did not stop for breaks. We only stopped when the trees parted and we saw the frozen marshland. That meant we were almost halfway back. We set camp there because we physically could not push further that night. We formed a tight circle with the sled in the center. We sat back to back. No tents. No one allowed to step more than several feet away. I sat between Hayes and Miller. The stars were gone behind a sheet of cloud. Wind blew sharp across the marsh grasses frozen under snow. Miller spoke quietly. What if it decides to take one of us tonight? No one answered. We all wondered the same thing. We sat in a tight ring with our backs touching and our rifles across our laps. Every direction felt exposed. I tried to count breaths to keep my pulse steady. The marsh behind us carried a flat tone of distant wind that made it sound like a low hum beneath everything. I kept telling myself that dawn would come, that the woods would open more as we moved further south, and that if we stayed together, we still had a chance to make it back. The first disturbance came only minutes after second watch began. A stone hit the snow several yards to our right. It bounced once, not thrown by accident, thrown with aim. Hayes and Horror shifted their rifles toward the sound. Another stone hit behind us. These were not loud hits. They were measured, meant to provoke reaction, meant to pull eyes in separate directions. I leaned close to Hayes. He was trying to confuse us. He nodded once, jaw clenched tight. Something then spoke from the darkness again. Not a voice we recognized. It was a whisper so soft I barely caught the shape of its words. I saw Miller flinch. What did it say? I asked him. Miller shook his head. I don't know. It sounded like a question. The wind shifted and the whisper rose again. This time I could hear enough to know what it was trying to do, but I still couldn't make out the exact meaning. It was speaking quietly enough that we would lean forward to catch it. That was the point. It was testing how curious we were willing to get. Sergeant Hoare broke the silence. It does not approach unless someone breaks the circle. Nobody moves. If you hear something you recognize, do not look in that direction. We stayed like that until there was color in the sky. Not full dawn, enough to see our breath in faint blue instead of black. The marsh glowed with a weak early light that gave shape to the low shrubs and broken reeds around us. I had made it through the night without losing focus, but my joints hurt and my throat felt raw from breathing cold air. We moved again as soon as there was enough light to see silhouettes beyond 30 yards. Our pace increased as the trees grew sparser. The river turned south again and the ground rose slowly. We ate while walking. We did not stop more than a few minutes to drink melted snow from our tins. The horses seemed more willing to move now, like they sensed escape ahead. Every mile south felt like a piece of rope slackening around us. By early afternoon, snow began. Soft flakes at first, then heavier. Our tracks blur behind us. I wanted that. I wanted the woods to swallow everything we left behind. If it was tracking by prints at this point, I wanted every sign covered. A strange calm set in for an hour. Not peace, just absence of new escalation. I wondered if it backed off to watch from a more comfortable distance. I wondered if it wanted to wait until we believed we were out of reach. There was nothing rational about expecting this creature to think like a human mind. Yet every part of my instinct told me it was waiting for a correct moment, not a random one. When the cabin roofs of the old Hudson Bay trading ruins appeared through the trees, I felt a small lift in the chest. We had marked this site during the northbound trip. Once we passed here, there were known survey markers leading south. 3 more days, and we would reach the fort. Just 3 more days. There were 2 cabins half collapsed and a stone foundation with a broken chimney. We sheltered briefly under the leaning porch of the least ruined cabin. Snow had gathered in the interior since the roof had partially collapsed inside. We did not enter deeper. It felt wrong stepping over the boundary of abandoned structures after everything that had happened. Hor checked his pocket watch. Another hour before dark, he said, "We cover another 2 miles, and then we camp in a defensible low basin. We can make that. Everyone stay sharp." We started forward again through the thinning trees. The snow began to slow. Visibility improved. Then Dumont raised his left hand sharply, and everyone froze. Ahead 40 yards out across a small rise was a human body face down in the snow. Miller almost stepped faster, but Hayes caught his sleeve. "Wait," Hayes said. We formed a line and approached slowly. The horses shivered and shook their heads. The sled runners scraped lightly behind us. When we were close enough to see detail, I felt the same sick pull inside my stomach that I felt at the pool where the trapper vanished. The body wore a soldier's wool coat. The boots were ours. The coat was torn open across the back. Bones showed through the tear. The spine had been opened. There was no blood pooling in the snow, which meant whatever emptied that body had done so without rupture or spray. Sergeant Hoare knelt beside the body and rolled it with the flat of his rifle. The face turned toward me. It was Private Mercer. He had been separated from another detachment 3 weeks before and was rumored missing along this route. We had assumed wolves, but we never found his trail. We stood silent while the snow thickened around us again. Dumont finally spoke. "This is not the kill of a starving beast. This is a trophy. It keeps bodies as warnings." Hoare straightened and looked at each one of us. "We do not break. We keep moving south, and we do not slow down." Nobody argued, not even Miller. We dragged Mercer's body under a large spruce and covered it with branches and snow. Not a burial, but enough so his face would not be left open to the sky. Just as we finished covering him, I heard a sound behind the nearby ridge. A heavy step, a deliberate shift of weight against a tree trunk. Not running, not stalking, standing there watching. Hoare raised his rifle toward the ridge. Eyes forward, keep formation. We pulled the horses far closer to us and started moving again. For the next hour, we walked without speaking a single full sentence. Every few minutes, we all felt that urge to look behind us. Every few minutes, we held ourselves back. And the whole time, I felt it behind the line of trees, matching our pace, not rushing, not afraid, studying which moment would break us enough that one would fall behind. We found a basin sheltered by rock just after nightfall. The river curved behind us, and the ridge formed a hard barrier on 2 sides. We set no tents again. We sat close in a circle with the horses inside our perimeter. No one wanted canvas between us and sight lines. Even the horses kept their heads low and rested their weight forward like they were preparing to bolt at any shift in pressure. We did not talk about strategy. Everyone already understood we were beyond tactics. This was endurance. This was making it until daylight again. Hayes cleaned his rifle bolt without speaking. McKenna chewed slow and steady on a small piece of bread. He looked like he was forcing each swallow. Lavoie stared into the snow in front of him. His lips moved slightly, like he was thinking through something he didn't want to say out loud. Dumont sat with his hands resting on his knees and his gaze fixed on one line of trees in particular. That made me watch the same line. I tried to see what detail drew him. The first sound came like a low, shifting pressure in the brush. Not movement, more like weight leaning slowly against a trunk and then easing off of it. Then again, steady and patient. Miller shifted closer to me. "Is waiting for one of us to panic," he whispered. I nodded. "It wants someone to break formation. That is how it separates us." Hoare kept his voice level. "Nobody stands. Nobody breaks the circle. If someone thinks they see something behind them, they tell the man next to them, 'Do not turn alone.'" Minutes passed. My legs cramped and my shoulders felt locked. Then Wood snapped behind McKenna. He jerked slightly and inhaled through clenched teeth. Hayes raised his rifle an inch. We all leaned toward that direction, slightly, without meaning to. I could feel it manipulating how our bodies wanted to shift. It was moving pressure back and forth like herding tactics. Then a voice whispered from the brush. "Corporal Hayes." Hayes froze. It was a woman's voice, fully human, not distorted, not broken, calm and steady. Hayes blinked twice. His breathing changed rhythm. "That sounded like my mother," he whispered. He reached his hand inch by inch toward his rifle strap. I put my palm on his wrist, firm, but not aggressive. "She is not in these woods. This is not her." His hand trembled. He stopped moving his arm. His eyes stayed fixed into the dark. If I had hesitated 2 seconds longer, he would have stood. Then the voice shifted tone. It used Hayes' voice again, the same cadence we heard before at the marsh. Then it used Horace's voice, then Dumont's, then mercilessly, it used mine again. Hearing my own voice speak words I did not say made something freeze inside my chest. It said a single sentence. "You're already dead." No one reacted out loud. No one broke. But I could feel the line of dread run through every man. After that, silence held for several long minutes. Then a sound hit the rock above us. A solid impact. Then another, heavy like a large stone thrown with perfect control. Dumont leaned slightly toward the sergeant. "It is escalating because night is deep. It wants a mistake before morning." We all braced ourselves harder. Hours passed like that without another voice. We rotated watch, but all of us were awake anyway. Near dawn, the wind shifted. The air felt thinner. The light began to rise. I felt something loosen inside me when I saw the faint blue of day return. We waited until the sky had color before standing. We stretched our legs slowly, careful not to make sudden movement. The horses shook out their manes and stamped their hoofs. We marched again. The next 2 days south were not easy, but the creature did not appear in front of us again. Only distant footfalls once, only a flicker of height behind a line of birch. It was letting distance build while forcing exhaustion to grow inside us. Every time we tried to convince ourselves we might have left it behind, it gave a small sign we had not. On the 3rd day south, the tree line thinned far enough that I could see open ground ahead. The land sloped downward toward the frozen flats, not far from the outpost. I saw faint smoke far away in the distance like a thread in the winter air. We were close. The horses sensed it, too, and started pulling harder. Our boots touched old, packed ruts in the snow from past patrols. 2 hours later, we saw the post palisade. I stared at the shape of the gate and let myself feel relief because it was right there. A structure of human wood and iron hinges and stone hearths and lanterns that did not lie and did not play games with voices. Horror turned to all of us. We do not slow. We do not stop. We get through that gate and we haul that bar down quick. We moved across the open last stretch fast. Halfway across the open field, Miller fell behind 2 steps. He looked drained, like his boots suddenly weighed more. I reached back and grabbed his coat sleeve to pull him forward. That was when I heard a break behind us. A short single crack. When I turned my head, Miller was gone. There was a shallow trench in the snow that cut sideways toward the tree line. No scream, no struggle, just absence. I did not hesitate. I forced myself not to call his name because that was exactly the moment the creature wanted. "Move," I said. "Move now." We ran. We reached the gate, winded and shaking, and slammed it shut behind us. The corporal on duty at the watchtower stared at us with confusion because we must have looked like we had returned from a year in a single week. We dropped the crossbar into place. Only 6 of us stood inside that gate. For the rest of that winter, nobody ordered another small detachment that far north without full company strength and repeat flare posts along the trail every quarter mile. The officers said the missing men were lost to winter conditions. Even when they saw the condition of Mercer's body, even when they saw our eyes when we tried to sleep, they asked us if we wanted to file witness statements. None of us did. Not because we wanted to bury what happened, but because we knew nobody else would understand the full weight of what stalked us those nights. Nobody else would believe that it waited for human minds to break rather than bodies to weaken. We stayed alive because we stayed together until the final stretch and because we never answered the voices outside the circle. I still think about Miller sometimes. I still think about the trapper we tried to pull back in a human reach before dawn took him under that ice. I think about Mercer's body left under those branches and whether something ever came for it again. I think about those long prints behind us those last 2 days south and whether the creature truly stopped following or whether it simply chose not to cross the boundary of that post because it never needed the walls. I survived, the others survived, but I have never believed that things stopped watching the moment we slammed the gate.